Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It has certainly been a busy 2 weeks for Donald Trump, and if you don't believe that, simply look at the front page of some of the newspapers. USA Today, for example, adds up all the executive orders, and by using the word executive orders, I mean different kinds of things. There are actual executive orders. There are then what are called presidential memoranda and national security directives. But if you lump all those together, in the first approximately 10 days of Barack Obama's beginning in White House and administration, 18 for Donald Trump, 20. So basically their headlines, 10 days, 20 orders. Might just mention that real quickly because when we talk about executive order, I mean that in the broadest sense. Certainly those are executive orders, of which he's had 7. But then you also have presidential memoranda, and there have been 8 of those. And a presidential memorandum is something that is sort of called an executive order by a particular cabinet officer to do something. And then we have 3 national security directives. Those are things which obviously deal with national security, are the functional equivalent of an executive order. And then you also have some proclamations, and he had 2 of those. Some of those are very insignificant in terms of national policy. One, of course, is Donald Trump established a National School Choice Week, which we talked about last week. But some are very significant. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was one of those. But anyway, a total of 20 dealing with such Trans-Pacific Partnership, Air Act, to mention just a few. Then we have, of course, some that affect very important issues that we've discussed here, like the Affordable Care Act, or like things like abortion with the Mexico City policy and preventing our funds going to International Planned Parenthood. Some are construction projects, which would cause the government to revive the actions on the Keystone XL pipeline or to deal with some of the environmental projects. And then the ones we're going to probably spend most of our time talking about, at least in the first hour today, would be the ongoing debate about the refugee program and what that might mean and how to begin to think about that. I might mention that that's going to be kind of our focus in the first hour, but in the second hour, because we recognize that we are going to have an announcement tonight by President Trump of who would be his Supreme Court nominee, we're going to get into that issue as well. So one has been front and center for quite a while, and that is the 120-day moratorium, I should say, on the refugee admissions program. Also, a reduction in the number of various refugees that would be allowed, a cap of 50,000, as well as a question about how to apply some of the vetting that will take place in the future. And as I've said before, it's really important to read widely, because you see all sorts of different facts and figures and statistics. The one I used yesterday is a good example, CNN saying that there is absolutely no evidence at all that Christians were prevented from coming to this country. From a Pew Research study that looked at all of the countries, and again, about 38,000 Muslims, 37,000 Christians. But that's not the statistic that many people have been looking at, not the one I used in my commentary a couple of months back. That is, if you look at, and this comes from the Obama administration, so this are their numbers, that those individuals coming from Syria, 13,000 Muslims, look at. And a lot of this we explained is not necessarily a bias against Christians, but just the reality of the way they were defined. They oftentimes were finding themselves not wanting to go to some of these refugee camps because they might be persecuted. In other cases, they didn't qualify as a refugee or qualify as one seeking asylum. We can go into all the details on that, but nevertheless, that's one of those things that just, again, illustrate the need for us to kind of think through. As we talked about some of the concerns that were raised yesterday, I mentioned, of course, Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham happened in the airports, and shouldn't this have been vetted through the Departments of State and Defense and Homeland Security and the Justice Department? I think we can see maybe one reason why that was not the case, because yesterday you had the announcement from the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, that she could not in good conscience enforce this rule. I can read you her statement, which, interestingly enough, if you have some of these papers that had an early bedtime, as USA Today does, they don't even mention what happened next. She said, I'm responsible for ensuring that the positions we take in court remain consistent with this institution's solemn obligation to always seek justice and stand for what is right. Went on to say, basically, Acting Attorney General, the Department of Justice will not present arguments in defense of the executive order unless and until I become convinced that it is appropriate to do so. Well, as this paper does not say, but as we all know now, Donald Trump said, okay, you're fired. Something, of course, he's been able to do on television quite a bit. If they do an interview with Sally Yates, who, of course, has served as the Undersecretary of Attorney General, what was in her mind when she did that? Did she think that when she issued that statement that would be enough and that the Trump administration go, oh, okay, I guess we'll just have to wait this out until Jeff Sessions gets in there. We'll wait it out and figure it out. Or maybe she thought that they would say, oh, okay, well, this is a profile on courage. Maybe I need to think this policy. I don't think she actually anticipated the next step, and that is you're fired. And, of course, the way in which you react to this depends on what you think of Donald Trump. If you think that posts and Facebook posts about this reminds them of the Saturday Night Massacre, which, again, is a little bit of a misnomer, but nevertheless, what happened under the Nixon administration. If, on the other hand, you think that this is a bold act, a lot of people will say that reminds them of when Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers who would not go back to work. But the point is that I would love to know someday when they do an interview with her what she thought was the next step. And I'd also like to know, and this might be, if nothing else, maybe a word of wisdom for you. She could have said, I have some real questions about this, and so let me see if I can get a meeting with the president to express privately my concerns. Or instead, let me post a letter which is either going to get me fired, although she may not have expected that, or just at least to take a strong stand and do the job, the same kinds of mindset that I use in my Trump Tower. If I just can't, in good conscience, sell flowers anymore. I'm going to sell something else. He'd walk down there and say, well, okay, but you're fired. And that's exactly what the President of the United States did, because if indeed you are in the executive branch, you serve at the pleasure of the president. So let's take a break. We'll come back and get into some of the other aspects of that. Sally Yates was just one more example that this is going to be an interesting 4 years. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Donald Trump has made some rather unorthodox picks for his cabinet. Perhaps that is to be expected in light of what he was saying on the campaign trail. But I still was not prepared for his decision to tap Dr. Ben Carson as his next Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Months ago, I suggested to my radio audience that if Donald Trump was elected president, he would likely pick Ben Carson as Surgeon General, or perhaps pick him as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Picking him to head up housing and urban development didn't seem like the right place for his gifts. Former Governor Mike Huckabee once tweeted that Ben Carson's best qualification was that he once lived in public housing. But that is not true. But it might have been true if it weren't for Ben Carson's mother. Armstrong Williams tweeted that she worked 3 jobs at a time to keep them out of public housing. It is true that Ben Carson spent his early years around people who lived in public housing, and in his testimony last month, he said he understood what housing insecurity was. His rags to riches experience will help him sympathize with millions of Americans who utilize HUD programs. Of course, he also brings his expertise from serving on the corporate boards of Kellogg's and Costco, and we shouldn't forget the time and effort he put into the Carson Scholars Fund that awards students who excel academically and are dedicated to serving their communities. Dr. Carson has said that the government often counts success by the number of people in public housing. He says we should count success based on the number of people we get out of public housing. He will have a $32 billion budget. He might start by asking, if the government gave you $32 billion to deal with poverty and housing, would you use it the way HUD currently uses it? I'm eager to see how he will answer that question. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
As we work through some of the conversation here about the particular bans and moratorium, let's, if we can, also encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. With the first article here, Executive Order on Refugees Separating, which I have noticed other people quoting. As a matter of fact, somebody that I may quote using that. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But our second article, if you've been watching the talk shows, the talking head shows and things like that, you probably noticed that there have been a number of individuals who, in order to say this is not a Muslim ban, may have been going out of their way to do so. And as Andrew McCarthy points out, maybe are trying to argue too much. His piece is entitled, "Is it a Muslim ban? Trump's goal is not. It is to exclude Sharia supremacists, a significant subset." And he said, there has been, and I'm going to move down to about the fourth paragraph here. He says there has been indignation on the one side from Trump defenders denying that the executive order is in any way a Muslim ban. He said time after time this weekend, right-of-center news outlets and commentators could be found defying their guests and counterparts to find the word Muslim or Islam in the executive order. He says, I sympathize with their frustration. The executive order is clearly not a ban on all Muslims or even on any specific Muslim, since the other side is slanderously suggesting otherwise. There is this irresistible urge to seize on anything that proves them wrong. And of course, the quick way to prove that is India banned? No. Largest country in the Middle East, Egypt. Is it banned? No. But then he goes on to say, and I thought this was very good, that even though there is this urge to try to prove them wrong and saying this is not a ban on Muslims, he says, yet there is only one reason there is an executive order, and that's the threat posed by Sharia supremacism, which is his way of talking about radical Islam. We can come up with any kind of term we want to use, which exactly refers to radical Islam. You can't have radical Islam without Islam. Therefore, the people that the executive order seeks to exclude are of necessity what? Muslims. To what many people are trying to create black or white, but I think it's a really important point that on the one hand, it is not a Muslim ban. First of all, it's not a ban, because we're talking about a moratorium of, say, 120 days, for example, or an indefinite possible ban from 7 countries, but it is certainly not a ban in the other ways in which this is being done. And it isn't all Muslims, as I think I've already illustrated. But then he goes on, he says that for decades, Washington has been suicidally unwilling to target our radical Islamic enemies for fear of offending Muslims in general. He says Donald Trump's more security-minded approach, which many Americans outside of Washington regard as common sense, was to call a temporary halt to the admission of Muslim aliens until the government could figure out an effective way to screen out Islamists or radical Muslims or supremacists, whatever phrase you want to use, from pro-constitutional Muslims who would be an asset to our country. And he even goes on to say a little bit later that since the threat is radical Islam, the geographical focus would necessarily involve places where the ideology is most prevalent. And like you said, these are Muslim places. Now, you might say, if you haven't listened to this program a great deal, who's Andrew McCarthy writing this? Well, it turns out that he was the federal prosecutor who actually was the one that prosecuted those individuals who tried to bring down the World Trade Center the first time, and has been an individual that has been following this really ever since. He now, of course, writes as the senior policy fellow at the National Review Institute, and this is a piece that goes on for a number of pages. I've only read a little bit of it right now, but just to help you understand how to deal with that. And I quoted from some of this yesterday because there was the question, which was interestingly enough raised by the acting attorney general up until yesterday, Sally Yates, as to whether it was constitutional. And he goes on to explain that as well, because when you look at our federal immigration law, you go to certain sections, 1182, 1152, and you begin to see that there are various actions that are allowed by the president when there might be a threat or when an individual might be detrimental to the interest of the United States. Now, of course, this will all get litigated, no doubt, because I know there will be all sorts of lawsuits brought on behalf of those various individuals who either are in this country, fear being deported, or those people who want to come to this country have not been allowed to do so. So we'll see how that all plays out. But the point is that this is an article that if you wanted to read a little bit more about this issue of whether or not this was a Muslim ban, this would be certainly a very good resource, and we've posted that on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a few phone calls, and as we go along, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go first to the state of Georgia, WLPT, and Sheldon. Thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me now?
I certainly can. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, it was, like I tell the young lady, we got the Sunnis and the Shias, the Muslims, from what I can understand, and they got the Koran, and from what I understand from listening to many pastors on the Christian radio station, they can actually lie to, forward their agenda. But they've been killing each other, Kerby. They've been killing each other over since Abraham's days. And why do we, Mr. Trump, all he did was stop, them countries, which, from what I understand, Congress had passed something or other to stop people from coming from where terrorists has been terrorist camps, training camps.
Right. Well, let me try to answer a few things that you put up there. First of all, is it permitted in Islam to lie? And that is what is known as taqiyya. And it's the Islamic term talking about the idea that you can, especially in warfare, mislead. So, yes, that is the case. Do individuals who come to this country lie? Yes, whether they're Muslim or not, whether they're Christian, atheist, Jew, Hindu, whatever. This is why a vetting process is really important, because we can't always assume that what a person puts on their application or what is even in their passport is always accurate. So this is why the president, you may agree or disagree with him, but certainly you could need to at least understand why he feels the need to do this, and that is that if indeed you have a vetting process which on both sides of the aisle, there have been people in the Obama administration, there have been Democrats, as well as Republicans and people that are part of the Trump administration. There have been people that have supported Donald Trump and people that think that he is the biggest mistake ever happening to this country, who all, at a moment of honesty, admit that we don't have a very good vetting process. And if you actually need examples, I've done some commentaries on individuals that have been allowed into this country and haven't been properly vetted. And so if you already start with the possibility that there could be some in the midst of these refugees who aren't here to escape terrorism, but are here to bring terrorism, does it not make sense that you would try to have a much more effective vetting process? And so that's at least at the core of what this is. And even though there are people shouting and holding signs and saying, we welcome all refugees, no, you don't, because some of those refugees aren't refugees. But most are indeed refugees. Let's be very honest about that as well. Most people that are coming to this country as refugees are fleeing terrorism. They're not bringing terrorism. But what percentage of those might actually use that situation in which they could then become the next sleeper cell? So that's the question I think we need to put on the table. And so I think that's a good one, and we'll come back and take some more phone calls. Let me just mention that the last couple of days we've encouraged you, if you have not taken an action, to do so. Yesterday, especially when we talk about biblical prophecy in Israel, we mentioned it in a little more detail. We have an action item for you today. And if you have not taken advantage of this, it goes back to a vote that took place in the United Nations on December 23rd. Resolution 2334 condemns Israel, and it labels East Jerusalem and parts of Judea and Samaria as occupied territories. So if you would want to express your opinion about that to your two United States senators, you have Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Lindsey Graham that have actually put forward a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 107, that would actually cut off U.S. funding of the United Nations, which is about 22% of the UN funding, until they withdraw that resolution. So if you would like to express that to your two senators, we encourage you to visit the website and follow the prompts. We'll be right back.
I remember when I could take a family of 4 out for a simple dinner, and the bill came to around $10 for all of us. That was only about 15 years ago, believe it or not. Now, no way. But here and there, we still go out because it's kind of important to us as a family. Well, I believe that point of view is important, an important investment in all of our families. This is a unique and special time together each weekday. Kerby equips us to make a difference and keeps us aware of what's important to our families. Today, I urge you, many are watching from the sidelines. We need you in the game. Some give. If that's you, thank you. Many need to step up. Join the team, Truth Team 360. You can learn the details at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, click on Become a Monthly Partner. That's right next to the Donate Now button. Become a Monthly Partner. We need you on the team. Please join us. Pointofview.net. Or pick up the phone, call 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking a little bit about the 120-day moratorium on the refugee admissions program and some of the things that have been implemented by that executive order by Donald Trump. And if you'd like to weigh in with your comments, 1-800-351-1212. We've posted a couple of articles, one kind of separating fact from hysteria on the executive order on refugees. One that I just read from a few minutes ago by Andrew McCarthy, Is It a Muslim Ban? And then a third one, which we'll talk about in the second hour when we get into some of the issues of the Supreme Court. And of course, if these conversations continue on, no problem at all, because we've really allocated all 2 hours today so that we can get your phone calls. And just before we do, let me mention some other resources that you might want to look at that would be helpful for you to help think through this issue. And one of the people I mention so often on the program is Dr. Jim Dennison. As a matter of fact, tomorrow when we do our Millennial Roundtable, Penn & Dexter will be holding that with Nick Pitts and some other individuals. Nick Pitts actually works for Jim Dennison. And Jim Dennison today spent some time kind of explaining the whole issue of what this was and how it came about, and then said, my purpose is not to argue for one side or the other, but to help you think biblically. So he had 3 points, which, again, we can talk about as we move through there. Point number 1 was that Scripture encourages scrutiny. And he talks about the fact that the Bible consistently teaches the priority of self-defense. And you can see that in Luke 11 and Exodus 22, Proverbs 25, Nehemiah 4, Psalm 82, to mention just a few, that we are told to respect landmarks, that Moses noted that when God divided mankind, he fixed borders. So it all has to do with this idea of borders and security. So there's quite a bit. It's a long paragraph, but I'm just giving you a brief summary. And if you wanted to go to the Dennison Forum and find some of that material, I think it does a very good job of helping us understand key verses that would help us understand self-defense, borders, sovereignty, those kinds of things. Then point number 2 is our government is responsible for our safety. That one I think would be pretty obvious when you go to Romans 13, 1 through 7. Even in verse 4, it talks about that the government is a servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. So obviously there's a responsibility for the government to protect us. And then number 3, he says, compassion expresses the heart of God. And he says Scripture consistently calls for us to care for immigrants and foreigners. Gives us examples from, again, Exodus 22, Leviticus 19, Deuteronomy 10, Ezekiel 47, Zechariah 7, Malachi 3, Hebrews 13, to mention just a few. And so he's talking about, again, the need for compassion. So point number 1, Scripture encourages security and borders. Number 2, government is responsible for our safety. But number 3, we have to obviously deal with those who are in the land, aliens, foreigners, not to mention those who are actually members of our community, the widows, orphans, and poor, with compassion. And to pull those different issues together, I think, is what is the real challenges for Christians, because sometimes they feel like those different biblical principles are conflicting one another, and I think it's important for us to begin to think through how to apply those in an effective way. Well, let's take some more phone calls. We have a full bank of phone calls, so I'm going to give you this half an hour or longer, no matter how long it takes, to get some of your comments. So we'll go first of all to, I think it's Arkansas. Norman, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Kerby. God bless all of you. I just want to share a couple thoughts, and it's on the 2 issues up in front. And what you started with was Sally, and why I'm just going to give you the take straight up. She defied President Trump purposefully, knowing that her time was short-lived in her position, because Trump will clean house. He knows who the enemies of the United States are, and he's going to get rid of them. And she knows her time is short, and what she wanted to do is to defy him publicly to cause more rabble of the Democrats to rise up and riot. And I believe that's intentionally what her express purpose was there. And so I'll let you deal with that in further discussion down in the program. I won't be able to hear the whole program today. I'm sorry about that. The other point is with regarding the refugees, I have relatives in Canada. If you were to try to get into Canada, a nation similar to ours in economic theory and, basically work ethic and so forth, much more so than Mexico, they vet everybody, and you have to have very definitive offerings to even be considered for citizenship in Canada. They will not just let anybody in whatsoever. This process should be the American process. Every applicant should be vetted to the core, and they should be vetted on the basis of what can you bring to offer to our country, and how can you be brought into our country to assimilate to our values and not try to change them. What's more, when I see in history since the Civil War, and the average American doesn't even understand what the difference between the United States of America is and the people thereof, we the people, we the government, and federalism that came since the Civil War, which has led to globalism and in its power grab all over the world by these industrialists and so on. And I don't even want to get into all the cartels associated and infiltrated into federalism in America. But what I want to say is that if people knew the real truth about who they're dealing with and Satan's little scheme and what it's going to be when the Antichrist heads it up, I just want to make that point that it does more harm than good, and people need to understand what taking back the United States is and realize that our enemies that we've kowtowed to, like Saudi Arabia, that we have bowed over to and given them the billions of dollars, we should muscle them under control and force them to make these refugees comfortable, because we need places that are safe havens for these unfortunate souls that we all love and God loves. We don't hate these people whatsoever. What we want is help for them in cultures they can much more readily identify with. We love people. We don't hold against people what God has already showed us how to love and what to love in the sense of these people. We hate sin. We don't hate the sinner. And so I really want to say that the United States needs to have a foreign policy that vets everybody from every country. And the other point is that these countries like Saudi Arabia that have gotten away with just carte blanche against our country, we need to muscle them into submission and make them do the right thing, as well as all these other countries in the Middle East that have defied us.
Well, Norman, you said a lot there. I'll see if I can, as we go along, maybe respond. But let me respond to your last one, because it was kind of intriguing that Ben Shapiro, when he was evaluating what actually was put forward by Donald Trump in this executive order, said in some ways it was too broad and in some cases was too narrow. And I'll just take the second part. He says, it might be too narrow in that, he says, why doesn't the executive order not include, as you just mentioned there, Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Afghanistan? Of course, some of that goes back to the fact that these particular states that were identified were actually part of what was called the Terrorist Travel Prevention Act, which actually happened during the Obama administration. But anyway, I think you've raised a number of good points, and along the way, maybe I can pick off one or two as we have other callers join in. So thank you for your phone call today.
Thank you. God bless everybody. Bye-bye.
Let's see if we can get in a few more just before we run out of time in this segment, but we'll have more in the next segment, and I'll carry it into the second hour if we need to do so. In Texas, KAVX, Terry, go. You're on.
Hi. I just wanted to add a little bit to what that gentleman before me just said. If we would just sit back and let Donald Trump do his job like he said he was going to, everything would iron itself out. He's just fulfilling his promise of making America great again, and he swore that he was going to defend our borders and all that, and we just got to give him time. Sure, it was right off the bat, but that's the way Donald Trump is. He doesn't sit around and say, well, maybe next week or whatever. He He said he was going to hit the floor running, and that's what he's doing.
Nobody can
We
say
need
that
to
he
go back.
isn't doing what he said. I mean, a lot of people are saying, wow, how did this happen? Somebody who in the campaign said he was going to do this, and now in the first 10 days is actually doing this. And I think even the Washington establishment did not expect this. Even those
I
who
know.
feared him said, yeah, but when he gets into office, he'll probably change his mind on some of that. And nope, that's pretty much what he's saying and doing are pretty much the same thing. Whether you like it or not, you knew what you were getting. There's no real surprises with most of these actions. Many of those can be found on the website that was up there during his campaign, and now you can find some of that same material on the White House website as well. So one last comment just before we take a break. Any other comments? I guess I need to go to a break, and I have to put you on hold if for no other reason than there is time that we need to go to one of those mandatory breaks, so we will do so. And when we come back, we'll take some more of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ricky Knight and Billy Two Feathers filed a lawsuit on behalf of several of their fellow inmates in the Alabama Department of Corrections. The lawsuit challenged the department's short hair policy, which forced them to cut their hair and violate the requirements of their Native American religious beliefs to keep their hair uncut. The 11th Circuit reviewed the case following the decision of Holt v. Hobbs, in which the Supreme Court invalidated a prisoner's successful challenge to the department's beard policy. While the litigant in Holt was successful in being able to exceed the 1/4-inch beard limit for religious reasons, the Knight v. Thompson litigants were unsuccessful. The difference between the two cases was not simply the difference between the Islamic faith of one and the Native American religious beliefs of another. Instead, the court determined that Alabama could advance a compelling justification for the short hair policy, whereas none could be advanced for the beard limitations. Long hair posed a risk that a half-inch beard did not, and no one could demonstrate a less restrictive way in which the department's compelling interest in preserving security, discipline, hygiene, and safety could be achieved. Knight v. Thompson reminds us that sometimes the balancing act that is religious liberty must give way, but only when there are simply no other options available. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that we've posted a number of articles on our website today, pointofview.net. Give you an opportunity to read a few things. And also, I mentioned just a minute ago a piece by Dr. Jim Dennison of the Dennison Forum, and we have had links to that in the past. As a matter of fact, one of the individuals who works with the Dennison Forum will be on tomorrow, Nick Pitts, who is actually an individual involved in the cultural engagement. He's Director for Cultural Engagement for the Dennison Forum. Also, another individual I'm quoting from from here is John Stonestreet, a good friend of the ministry, but also one of the individuals that does the Chuck Colson Breakpoint commentary. His one today, dealing with the executive order, refugees, national security, and a biblical worldview. So I would also commend to you that article as you're trying to think biblically about some of these issues. And let's go back to the phone and give a few of you a chance to join the conversation. Let's go to Georgia this time. Jane, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thank you, Kerby. And God bless that man that you had on 2 phone calls before, because he basically said a lot of what I was going to say. But I need to say this. President Trump, was elected by the people, and he won the election. This is nothing but a political hack and obstructionist from the Democratic Party. He didn't even have his attorney general in place, and there was no chaos as they said it was, and everything that they say has been refuted this morning on Fox News with the attorney from Virginia, who actually was part of executing them not coming in. And the main thing is they are Muslims who are coming into this country. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with Sharia law. We don't serve Sharia law, but, for 8 years, and, sad to say, part of Bush's administration allowed this stuff to go on. Now, God, I have no, I believe wholeheartedly that God put Trump in this position for such a time as this because God needed that personality to do something about it. And this was all orchestrated by George. All this chaos and everything was orchestrated by the far left, George Soros, with all this money, all this chaos. It's shot from toppling the government. This is what's in place now.
Well, and as you and I both know, we had a lot of this controversy before anything happened, even before the inauguration. Can you imagine after the announcement tonight, and in the second hour we'll get into who it probably would be as the Supreme Court nominee, how much more controversy we'll have over the next couple of weeks. Some of these protesters maybe need to pace themselves, because if they plan on protesting here for the next 4 years, it's kind of like a marathon. They're going to have to think about whether or not they want to expend all their energy here at once or not. But it's going to be quite a 4 years, I suspect.
Yeah, well, they're getting paid by George Soros. This goes back to when Trump was in the campaign.
I wasn't sure if they were salaried or whether they were hourly. I wasn't sure if they were getting paid hourly or. I'm just having fun with that one, but yeah. Well, one more comment, and let me go on, because we got just a whole bank of phone calls. A lot of people want to express their opinion today. Let me see if we can go to, real quickly, let's go to Tom in South Carolina. Tom, what would you like to add to our conversation here today?
First off, I would like to comment on the gentleman from Arkansas's comments. I must say, well said, and I agree wholeheartedly. What I called to say was the opponents of the immigration ban need to understand that though the majority of the Muslims coming into the country may be refugees, the potential for them to radicalize after getting into this country is possible, and certainly a chance, as in the last 3 years there has been cases. I think the San Bernardino shooting. That's what I was saying.
San Bernardino is a good example of that, isn't it?
Orlando nightclub shooting.
Maybe there, Orlando, yeah.
And then the fellow that ran his car into the crowd of students at the university and got out wielding the knife, he was even born here. So the potential for them to radicalize after they get into our country and do the lone wolf attacks must certainly be kept in mind. I do not believe this is a Muslim ban, but, and that's all. I'm going to leave it hanging there and let you form your own opinion.
Well, Tom, appreciate that. And again, you pointed out some very disturbing concerns as well. In my book, A Biblical Point of View on Islam, we've talked about the radicalization. As a matter of fact, the next time I update that book, I will probably put some of those examples in there, because we saw the potential. But when I first wrote that book on Islam years ago, the potential was more in the universities and especially in the prisons. Chuck Colson had really documented a lot of that. Now, because of the advent of the internet, individuals can get on their computers and simply become radicalized, and that's just a whole different element of something we've never really seen before. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But let me go to a first-time caller here, Jason in Florida. Sounds like that's the first time you've heard the program, so what do you think so far?
So far, I'm liking the views here. I believe that, like everyone else so far that I've heard, that I believe that people are criticizing Trump for something other that they just need to step back and relax for a little bit. I mean, look at Obama, how he banned refugees and everything from Iraq, in 2011. Now they're showing their butts about Trump banning some countries that, banning some Muslims from or not Muslim, but just people from that area. It's not necessarily just Muslim.
We did mention that yesterday, of course, since you're a first-time caller, but I did talk about the fact there was a 6-month ban on Iraqi refugees back in 2011 under President Obama. You can go back to 1980. Of course, I'm a little bit older than some of the listeners in the audience, and remember President Carter actually banning Iranian visa holders. That was done in part to really pressure Iran, but we do have those precedents, and we talked a little bit about what you have in immigration law, Section 1152, Title 8, some of those. So, again, I think you're right on target. And if you already dislike the man, you can find all sorts of things to justify marching into the streets. But if you're wanting to be a little more objective and look at the facts that are out there, I think you're going to come to a little different conclusion than the people out there on the streets today.
Well, I've got a little bit of an alternative to stopping all that rioting and protesting. If all those parents of these millennials cut off their allowance, they have to figure out some way to get out there and make a living and eat.
Well, and one of those, again, we'll talk about the Millennial Roundtable. I might mention, Jason, listen tomorrow if you can, because we do a Wednesday Millennial Roundtable, and that's where we bring in individuals really talking about reaching out to that generation born between 1980 and 2000. Friday, we have our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford will be with us. Kelly Shackelford with First Liberty will be talking about some of this as well, which actually will be one of the topics we'll get into in the second hour. I'll continue taking these phone calls on the refugee program and some of the protests, but somewhere in the second hour, I want to get into the issue of the Supreme Court nominee that will be announced tonight and whether or not this could change everything, and that is whether or not the United States Senate might decide to simply say we're going to actually put a person into the Supreme Court based upon a majority vote rather than the requisite 60 votes to end cloture. That's what's called the nuclear option, and I'll explain all about that in just a minute, and also let you know who some of those nominees are. There's a pretty good idea of who probably one of those two will be, but I'll give you an understanding of who they are and kind of what they believe and why I suspect the Democrats will have as many protests tomorrow over that nominee as we have seen over the last couple of days over the refugee program. If you'd like to find a little bit more information on all these things we're talking about today, visit the website, pointofview.net. Don't forget, we also have that action alert for you if you'd like to express your opinion to your 2 United States senators about whether or not the United States should continue to fund the UN when it goes out of its way to condemn Israel. So if you want to support Israel and send a message, visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. The moment spending some time talking about Donald Trump's refugee immigration executive order. And if you'd like to join us, we will take those phone calls. Later on this hour, as we finish some of those phone calls, I want to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court nominee that will be announced tonight, and the process by which he, because it looks like it is a he, will be confirmed by the Senate. And that leads us to discussing whether or not they would use what is called the nuclear option. That is a requirement only that you get 50 plus votes, instead of the requisite 60 votes to end a filibuster, a vote on what's called cloture. And I'll go into some of those details and also spend a little bit of time talking about the prime candidates and give you a little bit more understanding of who they are and what we might expect them to do if indeed they are confirmed to the Supreme Court. But let's go back and pick up some of the phone calls from the first hour. But if you'd still like to join us, we'll take some of the more of those calls having to do with the executive order dealing with refugees and the issue of immigration. Let's head first to Florida. Phil, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. And he was talking about the Christian, why they, President Trump said they'd be the head of the line. They already the minority in these Muslim countries, and it seems like they're the ones that especially ISIS and others put to death more frequently and in a greater number than their fellow Muslims. So I think they should be at the head of the line. Their goal is to eliminate all Christians.
At least be on an equal plane, and to, again, use one of the statistics that I've used in my commentaries, and one that sometimes doesn't seem to get cited by groups like CNN or MSNBC. The latest statistics out of Syria: 13,000 Muslims from Syria coming in as refugees, 77 as Christians. I guarantee you that there are more than 0.5% of Christians in Syria that would like to come and escape that, and actually sometimes stay away from some of those refugee camps because they're fearful, I think rightly so, of being persecuted or even killed by some of the Muslims in the refugee camps. So an important point. Were you going to also say something about the pro-life march?
Well, I was just going to say on that pro-life deal, life is one of the greatest gifts that God gives us, and to take a life is, in my view, and biblical view, as I see it, has been forbidden by God, and He don't look at it lightly.
You know, one of the people that wasn't able to get on yesterday, because I can look on the computer here and see who was up, was going to say, but couldn't stay on the line, that we seem to be spending more time worrying about refugees than about the killing of the unborn. And I don't want to take our eyes off that particular issue. Matter of fact, last night I was speaking to the Board of Counsel for Life, an outstanding group, and talking about all the things that are happening in the pro-life elements. For example, the vice president, first time you've ever had a sitting vice president go to the March for Life and talk about the fact that life is winning. You have H.R., the House Resolution 7, which has already passed the House, which would actually create a situation in which the Hyde Amendment would be permanent. You also have the attempt, and matter of fact, there's going to be, I think, a webcast even tonight to talk about how to move through the legislation to defund Planned Parenthood. Of course, you've already had Donald Trump using an executive order to defund International Planned Parenthood, used that so that he could deal with what is called the Mexico City policy that has really nothing to do with Mexico. That's just the name that's been given to it because in 1984 there was a Mexico City population conference, and that led to, at that time, sitting President Ronald Reagan to prevent our tax dollars going overseas to fund any kind of abortions overseas. That has been, again, re-implemented by Donald Trump. So a couple of pro-life issues that we will continue to talk about, and I think some of that will be covered tomorrow in our Millennial Roundtable by Penna Dexter, Nick Pitts. I think the idea was they're going to get Father Frank Pavone, so we'll see how that all plays out. I will be out speaking tomorrow, but then I'll be back here Thursday and Friday, and looking forward to every one of these programs we can do with you. Let's go back to the phones in Georgia this time. Jacob, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, thank you, Kerby. My thoughts is that President Trump's steps are being ordered by the Lord. And because of the visibility of the values that he is trying to implement, they are biblically supported. The world has come against him, but indirectly they are fighting against Jehovah God. And this is one of the things that I see is there is so much hypocrisy. They are fighting against aliens coming into the country and being protected. But we have citizens that are conceived in America, in the womb of women, and they are being murdered, slaughtered, to prevent them from coming into America to be able to live out and be represented by the Constitution of America.
Well, that's a good juxtaposition of two issues. I hadn't thought about that. Go ahead.
And this is totally hypocrisy. They will stand up and fight for people who are not citizens, but they will not fight against Planned Parenthood, who murders over 1 million children, American citizens. Every year, 3,000 American citizens are murdered every day in America. But these people would not for one moment go out and fight against that evil.
Pretty incredible. Jacob, thank you so much for putting those two issues together. We were talking about that a minute ago with Phil, but I think you did a good job of pulling those together as well. Let's head to New Mexico this time. KPCL. Tony, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. What would you like to add?
All through Scripture, God warns us of yoking ourselves with the non-believers, being alien, allies with non-believers, false gods. I think that as a nation, Trump is actually being led by God, some of his decisions. I think that we ought to be looking at the Christians over there in the foreign nation. We do more with converting Muslims over there by taking the Christians out of the equation and bringing them here, using them as refugees, and not allowing Muslims to come here, because then they'd be seeing, well, we're going to wind up still getting killed and all this other stuff, that maybe there is something to this God. He is giving them help, the Christians. They're seeing the difference. And our forefathers, they wound up telling us that all our decisions are not based just solely on the Constitution for it to be constitutional. It must be also based on the Word of God.
Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back and take some more phone calls. A little bit later, we're going to be looking at this issue of the Supreme Court nominee. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Donald Trump has made some rather unorthodox picks for his cabinet. Perhaps that is to be expected in light of what he was saying on the campaign trail. But I still was not prepared for his decision to tap Dr. Ben Carson as his next Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Months ago, I suggested to my radio audience that if Donald Trump was elected president, he would likely pick Ben Carson as Surgeon General, or perhaps pick him as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Picking him to head up housing and urban development didn't seem like the right place for his gifts. Former Governor Mike Huckabee once tweeted that Ben Carson's best qualification was that he once lived in public housing. But that is not true. But it might have been true if it weren't for Ben Carson's mother. Armstrong Williams tweeted that she worked 3 jobs at a time to keep them out of public housing. It is true that Ben Carson spent his early years around people who lived in public housing, and in his testimony last month, he said he understood what housing insecurity was. His rags to riches experience will help him sympathize with millions of Americans who utilize HUD programs. Of course, he also brings his expertise from serving on the corporate boards of Kellogg's and Costco, and we shouldn't forget the time and effort he put into the Carson Scholars Fund that awards students who excel academically and are dedicated to serving their communities. Dr. Carson has said that the government often counts success by the number of people in public housing. He says we should count success based on the number of people we get out of public housing. He will have a $32 billion budget. He might start by asking, if the government gave you $32 billion to deal with poverty and housing, would you use it the way HUD currently uses it? I'm eager to see how he will answer that question. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to be moving just in a few minutes to the Supreme Court nominee, but just while we're still on this issue of this particular set of executive orders related to refugees, immigration, and the rest, Tony mentioned this idea of yoked, and if you look at it from a biblical perspective or just simply from a common sense perspective, one of the things that Andrew McCarthy, and that's the second article we've posted on our website, talks about, is he says our goal is not to exclude Muslims from our country, but it is to exclude Sharia supremacists, a significant subset of Muslims. They reject our Constitution. Many of them would like to kill us. All of them want to submit to their law. The threat they pose is not hypothetical. They have killed thousands of Americans, are actively plotting to kill thousands more. And he says, I make no apologies for wanting to keep them out of my country, nor do I look at excluding them as excluding religion, but instead as excluding a totalitarian political ideology, something that our law already explicitly endorses. He's quoting from immigration law. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but Section 1182. And it has always said that any immigrant who has been a member of or affiliated with the Communist Party, of course that doesn't apply, or any other totalitarian party or subdivision or affiliate thereof, domestic or foreign, is inadmissible. If you recognize that somebody who believes in what you might call Sharia supremacy, and that is they believe that what should supersede the Constitution is Sharia law, then unless you just buy into this idea of political correctness, which says, well, we can't make moral judgments about somebody that might actually want to undermine the Constitution. And I recognize that some of those people out there with those signs believe that. You know, what should we say, and what right do we have to tell them that the Constitution should be the supreme law of the land? Well, first of all, I think we do, but you can see where some come to that. But I think most of us would say, wait a minute, we don't want to bring into this country individuals who at their very core want to undermine the government, want to undermine the Constitution. And this really, as again, Andrew McCarthy points out, has less to do with religion than it does with kind of the political ideology that comes from Sharia supremacists. So whether you look at it as Tony was looking at it in terms of being unequally yoked, or whether you just simply look at it in terms of a constitutional argument, you can see why, again, this is something that, again, I would encourage you to read the entire article by Andrew McCarthy. It's on our website, and we can certainly come back and talk more about that a little bit later this week. But let's go back to the phones and give a few more of you a chance that have been waiting long enough to join the conversation. We'll go up to Missouri, KTTK, and James, you're on.
Yeah, I was just been thinking for some time about this thing that we are expected to be tolerant of people of other religions and other nations and stuff. And I read in the Old Testament that God had told the people of Israel not to do that. It's contrary to what God had told the people of Israel. And every time that they got this idea that they're going to be tolerant with their neighbors, they always got in trouble. And I'm wondering if we're not going to get in serious trouble if we continue this path that we're going today.
Well, again, we're in kind of the modern world. We're in kind of the New Testament times, and we're also in a pluralistic culture. So the reality is certainly that we have that set of circumstances which are a little different than the Old Testament theocracy. But there, as I'm trying to allude to just a minute ago, certain kinds of philosophies, certain kinds of ideologies, even certain kinds of religious groups, which we recognize are detrimental to the body politic, detrimental to America, detrimental to the core values that we believe in. And again, if you say we are going to be a welcoming country, certainly we do welcome individuals here, but we also welcome them. And then what is America, what it means to be an American. And in order to be a citizen of America, and you have to really go through a citizenship class and study and understand. I frankly think that all individuals, whether they come here from another country or whether they were born here, should go through those classes. There have been attempts to even suggest that before we would allow certain kids to graduate from high school in certain states now, that they must pass a citizenship test so that they understand what America is, because every generation needs to be re-educated about what makes America great, why it's great, what are the historical principles about that. And so, again, those are some really important things that we want to talk about and we'll continue to talk about here on Point of View. Let's go back to the phones, though. In this particular case, we'll go to South Carolina. I think, Fred, you're a first-time listener or caller. So I think you're a listener, but you're a first-time caller. So thank you for joining the conversation today. Don't know if I got Fred. Maybe we'll put Fred on hold. And while we do that, let me, if I can, use that as an opportunity to kind of get us ready for what is going to be taking place tonight. And that is, you have a number of individuals that have been suggested as the possible nominees that would be put forward by Donald Trump. One of those is a man that we talked about last Friday. But again, let's talk about who this might be, and that is Neil Gorsuch. He, interestingly enough, is in the kind of Denver area. And so as a result of that, actually is in the 10th Circuit Court. We know a little bit about his pro-life convictions because he actually has written a book called The Future of Assisted Suicide and Euthanasia. And he talks about the fact that bans on assisted suicide should be done on the grounds that human beings are intrinsically valuable and the intention of taking human life by a private person is always wrong. He granted an injunction against Planned Parenthood. He actually was a graduate student at Oxford University and studied under a very famous philosopher. He also was an individual that mentored Princeton University professor Robert George. And so that, I thought, was something that was really striking about Neil Gorsuch. Another individual that people are talking about and maybe now has actually surfaced as the odds-on favorite would be Thomas Hardiman. He is in the Ninth Circuit Court. Interestingly enough, comes from really humble beginnings. Actually, when he was at Georgetown University in law school, actually paid for that by driving a cab. He, interestingly enough, has served alongside Donald Trump's sister. Also, having studied in Mexico, he speaks fluent Spanish, and also has been an individual that has been well received by various religious liberty groups because of his standing. Kelly Shackelford, who joins us almost every Friday, has been very impressed both with Neil Gorsuch and Thomas Hardiman on their various religious liberty issues. Matter of fact, also he actually ruled against a couple of groups that might be of interest there, and so this will be interesting to see how that kind of plays out in terms of some of his philosophy. And then the third one, who I think is originally was kind of first on the list, now has kind of become third on the list, would be William Pryor, or Bill Pryor, who's in the 11th Circuit Court, individual that was probably the odds-on favor originally, if for no other reason than his connection to Jeff Sessions, who eventually I think will be confirmed as the Attorney General. But there have been a couple of cases in which he's ruled on transgender issues and also the way in which he's treated Chief Justice Roy Moore. So we'll kind of see how that plays itself out. But we're talking at the moment about, of course, simply replacing the seat, if you will, that Antonin Scalia vacated when he died. But as we go to a break, and then we come back from the break, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the Supreme Court issues here. We also have the real possibility that Donald Trump will not just appoint one individual to the Supreme Court, but many more. Ruth Bader Ginsburg will turn 84 in March. Anthony Kennedy is already 80, and Stephen Breyer is 78. It doesn't take a lot of creativity or even understanding of the actuarial tables for insurance companies to recognize that some of these individuals may not last a whole lot longer. So that certainly is one very important issue that we'll talk about when we come back, as to whether or not Donald Trump not only appoints one individual to the Supreme Court, but 2, 3, maybe even 4 to the Supreme Court. In the meantime, there are more than 100 different vacancies in the federal courts. Last time I looked, the count was 103. So we are talking in this particular case about the fact that he would have, through the various people that are working with him, and he's getting a lot of advice, of course, right now, as we've mentioned, from the Federalist Society, as well as from the Heritage Foundation, to begin to fill up the federal court and the federal circuit court. And so we'll see how that begins to play itself out as well. But the question that many people have asked is, will it be possible for Donald Trump to get his nominee through the United States Senate? And that's why I want to come back to a piece by Mark Thiessen, who says Trump should go nuclear on his Supreme Court nominee. When we come back, I'll explain what that means and talk about how that could shake up everything. But we have to wait till after the break, so we'll see you on the other side of the break right after this.
I remember when I could take a family of 4 out for a simple dinner, and the bill came to around $10 for all of us. That was only about 15 years ago, believe it or not. Now, no way. But here and there, we still go out because it's kind of important to us as a family. Well, I believe that point of view is important, an important investment in all of our families. This is a unique and special time together each weekday. Kerby equips us to make a difference and keeps us aware of what's important to our families. Today, I urge you, many are watching from the sidelines. We need you in the game. Some give. If that's you, thank you. Many need to step up. Join the team, Truth Team 360. You can learn the details at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, click on Become a Monthly Partner. That's right next to the Donate Now button. Become a monthly partner. We need you on the team. Please join us. Pointofview.net. pointofview.net. Or pick up the phone, call 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour talking tonight about what is going to be taking place, because tonight we will see the announcement of a Supreme Court nominee put forward by Donald Trump. And of course, we would expect the Democrats to oppose this, one, because that's what their base expects. And there's a second issue, actually interesting enough, the day before Christmas, the New York Times posted a piece called "The Stolen Supreme Court Seat," in which they argue that this particular seat should have been filled by Merrick Garland, who was put forward by President Barack Obama, but because it was in the last year of Barack Obama's term, and because his vice president, back when he was a senator, Joseph Biden, had said years ago that we should never confirm an individual in the last year of a lame duck presidency, the Republicans said, okay, Joe Biden, we'll use the Biden rule. You, of course, wanted to use it against a Republican president, but we'll be glad to use it against a Democratic president. So you have, of course, Democrats now saying that this is a stolen Supreme Court seat. So there's going to be an incredible battle. And it's a battle that is going to be waged in large part because we no longer are doing what the framers intended. The framers never intended the Supreme Court to be, in every case, the final arbiter of issues ranging from abortion to same-sex marriage to affirmative action to Second Amendment rights or whatever it might be. But the reality is that's where we are now. That's not going to change anytime soon. The court's not going to withdraw its influence and begin to constrain its influence. Congress is not going to do it unless we call for a constitutional convention and change some of the things we've talked about here on the program. It's just not going to happen, and that's just reality. So let's face reality. The other issue is that when you put somebody on the court, they can have an influence for a long period of time. I mentioned Anthony Kennedy is 80. He was actually appointed by Ronald Reagan. I mentioned just a minute ago Stephen Breyer, 78. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to turn 84 in March. Those were individuals that were appointed by Bill Clinton. And so when you look at Neil Gorsuch, 49, Thomas Hardiman, 51, William Pryor, 54, you can see that any one of those individuals could spend the next 30 years on the court and influence decisions related to privacy, surveillance, transgender issues, maybe even overturn Roe versus Wade, might deal with other issues of sexuality, and who knows what all those might end up being. And so this is why this has become such a battle. It's also a battle for another reason, and that is, as I want to point out now from a very good piece by Mark Thiessen, that if you look at the various appointments that have been made, the Democrats are batting 100%. In other words, you look at their four justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor. All four of them have stayed consistently liberal on the bench. Matter of fact, so much so that you can't find any time they've ever veered or deviated at all from liberal orthodoxy. The Republicans, on the other hand, have had a bit of a problem. They picked 7 justices: Sandra Day O'Connor, Antonin Scalia, Anthony Kennedy, Clarence Thomas, David Souter, Samuel Alito, and John Roberts. And they're at best 3 out of 7. They're not even batting 50%, 500, So the question that has always been made is that given the fact that oftentimes when a Democrat is being considered, a Democratic nominee, I guess I should say, is being considered, they can oftentimes be fairly honest about their views and still get confirmed because of the way that takes place. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for example, was an ACLU lawyer, an individual that actually made it very clear that she felt that needed to continue, and nevertheless was actually confirmed very easily. And let's look at a couple of examples here. Sonia Sotomayor confirmed 68-31. Elena Kagan confirmed 63-37. But on the other hand, when it comes to an individual that might be conservative, and all 3 of these individuals would be conservative justices, there's a very good chance that they might not be confirmed, which is one of the reasons why Mark Thiessen says, maybe it is time for the Supreme Court nominee to be confirmed by the Republicans using what's called the nuclear option. And that means if you have to go back historically to 2013, that's where, as he points out, I'll quote from him here, Democrats broke a nearly 4-decade-long precedent and changed Senate rules to eliminate the filibuster for executive branch nomination and appointments to the federal circuit or district courts, allowing them to be confirmed by a simple majority. Now, he goes on to explain why. He said the reasons Democrats eliminated the filibuster for judicial appointments was to let President Barack Obama stack the federal courts with liberal justices and judges, particularly the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, the second highest court, which reviews many cases related to federal laws and regulations, and thus stack the courts. President Obama did. He appointed more than a third of the federal judiciary and reversed the ideological balance of the 13 U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeal. When he took office, 10 of those circuit courts had conservative majorities. Today, 9 have liberal majorities. And he even points out that you had one individual that they knew would not be confirmed and was sort of put up there as what they called a sacrificial lamb, an opportunity for Republicans to gain a scalp and then claim that they actually fought Barack Obama. And even that individual went on to be confirmed and actually was the one that wrote the decision that forced the Little Sisters of the Poor to violate their religious conscience. So the game has been played in only one direction. When a Democratic president puts up forward his nominee, those are always confirmed, and you can see those with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer under Bill Clinton, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor under Barack Obama. But when Republicans have put them forward, that hasn't always been the case, and so this is why he's suggesting that maybe it is time for Donald Trump to basically say this to Chuck Schumer. As you know, I have a list of 21 judges from which I choose my nominee to fill Justice Scalia's seat. One of those judges will be my nominee, and that nominee will be confirmed by the United States Senate. And then go on to say that in 2013, the Senate Democrats invoked what was called the nuclear option and changed the Senate rules to eliminate the filibuster for lifetime judicial appointments to the federal circuit courts. You did it so that you could fill the federal bench with liberal justices using Democratic votes alone. Well, if you try to obstruct my nominee, I will have no choice but to follow the precedent you set and apply those very same rules to the Supreme Court nominees, which means that I can confirm my nominee with Republican votes alone. And then he goes on, he says he could go on and say, I know that you have to put on a show of opposition for your base, but I want us all to be clear what the outcome is going to be here. My nominee will be confirmed. So it will be interesting to see if that plays itself out. If you think about it, this is a place where they could play nice. I did not know until today that the largest donor to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump could say, look, I've been the biggest donor to your senatorial campaign. Can't we work together on these issues? And, of course, Donald Trump might be willing to do that, but Chuck Schumer has been willing to do anything but. I've got all sorts of pictures here in front of me of different times where he's appeared before the press, making it very clear that he is going to do all he can to fight the nominee before we even know who the nominee is. So I think it's kind of intriguing. So this is another argument that's being made right now, given the fact that there will be an attempt to prevent whoever this individual is going to be tapped tonight to actually be confirmed, that maybe it's time for Donald Trump and the Republicans in the Senate to actually go the nuclear option. So we'll see how it plays itself out. Let's go back to the phones in South Carolina. Fred, are you with us now?
Yes, sir. I'm with you. How are you doing, Kerby?
Very good. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I want to tell you, I really appreciate your segue into what I want to say, because I believe it's all about creating chaos. You know, where there is no law, there's chaos. And just think about what the Democrats are doing. You know, they were upset that Donald Trump won the election, so then they argue about the Electoral College, that was illegal. They was upset at the fact that he was setting his businesses aside in the way that he was doing, but they argued that what he was doing was illegal. And now we're talking about the Supreme Court. You know, they want to change the fabric of America through the father law, if you will, and it's depending on how they view it. And that's the biggest thrust of everything, is that if they can create chaos at every aim or at everything that Donald Trump does and try to scream it's illegal, then they think that they can win on that by trying to change the whole makeup of our country, the Constitution, and our courts. And that's what I think is really the big issue here.
I think so. I need to take a break, and if you need to make another comment, I'll catch you on the other side of the break, because we have one of those mandatory breaks. We also have some other phone calls, and today I wanted to cover a little bit on the executive order on refugees, but also get you ready for the announcement that will come tonight. Who will be that Supreme Court nominee, and will he be confirmed? We'll find out. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ricky Knight and Billy Two Feathers filed a lawsuit on behalf of several of their fellow inmates in the Alabama Department of Corrections. The lawsuit challenged the department's short hair policy, which forced them to cut their hair and violate the requirements of their Native American religious beliefs to keep their hair uncut. The 11th Circuit reviewed the case following the decision of Holt v. Hobbs, in which the Supreme Court invalidated a prisoner's successful challenge to the department's beard policy. While the litigant in Holt was successful in being able to exceed the 1/4-inch beard limit for religious reasons, the Knight v. Thompson litigants were unsuccessful. The difference between the two cases was not simply the difference between the Islamic faith of one and the Native American religious beliefs of another. Instead, the court determined that Alabama could advance a compelling justification for the short hair policy, whereas none could be advanced for the beard limitations. Long hair posed a risk that a half-inch beard did not, and no one could demonstrate a less restrictive way in which the department's compelling interest in preserving security, discipline, hygiene, and safety could be achieved. Knight v. Thompson reminds us that sometimes the balancing act that is religious liberty must give way, but only when there are simply no other options available. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Fred, still with us, South Carolina. We were just talking about the chaos, and I think there'll be a lot more chaos after the Supreme Court nominee is announced tonight, don't you think?
Yes, I believe so. And if I can add one other point, and the reason why I was making that is because of the laws that we currently have, I believe, and the Constitution. It restrains morals. It restrains this everybody want to do what's right in their own eyes mentality that I find coming from the far left and progressive groups, and I feel like they're afraid that they don't want things to stay the way that they want to, judge things based on law. They want to judge things based on how it feels, the mainstream, so forth and so on. That's very deadly, and to a society, no nation will continue when we don't have good good principles to guide us as people. And if they can just confuse people's identity, if they can confuse morality, if they can confuse law, just law in itself, they're winning. They can win. And I hope that more Americans will wake up and realize that as a nation, we cannot sit back and let this happen.
Well, appreciate your phone call. I know you're first-time caller, so call back again.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a few more phone calls real quickly. Let's go up to Alaska. KJNP and Timothy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to point out, it seems to me the difficulty of the president's position. On one hand, it would be unconstitutional for him to ban any religious organization, sect, or belief because of the free exercise thereof clause of the First Amendment. But on the other hand, his duty as commander-in-chief of our armed forces is to protect and defend us against from all attacks, foreign and domestic. So Jesus told us to pray for those in authority above us. What we need to do is support the president in his decisions, not second-guess and countermand him. I don't think that I have any particularly remarkable insight to the situation, but I just want to pray for people to support the rule of law.
Well, I would think so. And I think he doesn't have to get into the horns of dilemma, because the second article that I've posted here would be one that I would encourage people to read, because by the time you get to the third page, Andrew McCarthy explains you don't really have to deal with the issue of religion, because we're not trying to exclude Muslims per se, just those individuals who are part of what could be considered a totalitarian group. And so the Sharia supremacists are really the issue we're looking at, those individuals that are coming here with the intent of supplanting the Constitution with Sharia law. And we can reject that whether we're Christians or not, whether we look at it from a religious point or not. My secular friends, my liberal progressive friends could say, well, I don't want to bring people here that are going to eventually try to overturn the Constitution and create an Islamic theocracy. And so they can reject it just on the basis of essentially common sense. We can reject it on the fact that it's following a false religion. So I think that's the way we can deal with that without ever having to get into some of those questions. But I think back to your key point, Timothy, we are to support those in positions of authority. And this is, again, one of the interesting things that came out of the actions by the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, who instead of saying, okay, he is my president, I didn't vote for him, I'm a Democratic leader, I have actually voted for Barack Obama, I've served under his administration, but she could at least say, he is my president now, so let me quietly go to him and express some concerns about how the Justice Department could actually implement this order. But instead, she publishes this piece that ended up getting her fired. And so I think we should learn some lessons from that. If nothing else, a vicarious lesson. If you disagree with your boss and you publicly contradict your boss, you might get your pink slip. But if you could go behind the scenes and, express any concerns, maybe you could bring about a change. So, Timothy, I appreciate your phone call today.
I'd like to make one more comment.
Please do.
That the president is further hampered by this vetting process that everybody is hanging on, and will be vetting individuals that, in observance of their religion, can lie, cheat, and steal in order to further the progress of their religion. So this is even further need for prayer for this process that we're hanging on to be administered correctly. It's beyond me. I'm a simple man, and I don't see how I could do it. So I'm praying for the president to be able to enact powers and regulations to be able to pursue this.
Very good. And let me just come back to that, because we did mention that earlier. I think Sheldon and some of the others were talking about that, because in the Quran, and I'm not encouraging you to go and read it for your quiet time or anything, but if you go to the Quran and Surah 16, for example, it establishes circumstances in which a Muslim can and even is encouraged to lie. There's a couple of other passages that talk about, for example, in Surah 40, of hiding your faith in some of this. And this is what's known as taqiyya, or deception. And that is justified. So you are faced with a really significant challenge. Are there people that lie on application? Yes. Are there people that inflate their resumes? Yes. So that's why an individual that is doing some vetting needs to think about that, whether you're talking to a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, an atheist, a Christian, whatever it might be. But that, as he points out, is another very significant issue to pay attention to. So again, let me encourage you to learn a little bit more about Islam. Some of that is in my book, A Biblical Point of View on Islam, and we, of course, still make that available on the website. Just before we run out of time, let me mention again that the three possible candidates, and again tonight, it's possible Donald Trump will surprise us, but most people think that the odds-on favorite might be Neil Gorsuch, an individual graduated from Columbia University, went to Harvard Law School, but also was at Oxford, and an individual that actually did some training and mentoring of Professor Robert George at Princeton, and as an individual that has written on some of these pro-life issues related to euthanasia. Thomas Hardiman is another favorite of many individuals, a graduate of Notre Dame, went to Georgetown University, and also worked alongside Donald Trump's sister, interestingly enough, as an individual that has written a number of pieces, and both of these individuals on the religious liberty cases have certainly been very well received. And then finally, Bill Pryor, who I would have thought would have been the odds-on favorite originally because of his connection to individuals like Jeff Sessions, a graduate of Northeastern Louisiana University, went to Tulane University to get his law degree and is in the 11th Circuit Court. And so, again, one of these individuals will be nominated. And then the real question and the battle begins as to whether or not they will be confirmed. And we'll see how that plays itself out. The argument that has been put forward on some of this, though, is that if indeed you use the nuclear option, you would not necessarily have to get any Democratic votes as long as at least 50 of the 52 Senate Republicans voted in favor of that nominee. The vice president, Mike Pence, could cast the tie-breaking vote. So as few as 50 votes could put them in. And this is where you would think that maybe Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer need to get together and say, Chuck, you know, I've been your biggest supporter here, and if you want to keep fighting me, you can, and I'll invoke the nuclear option, but I'd rather go the other way and maybe have you let some of your fellow Democrats actually vote for my nominee. We'll see how it plays out. It will be fascinating. Of course, we'll be talking about that all week, so feel free to visit our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Alisa, as well as Shamila for the help behind the scenes. Join us tomorrow for our Wednesday Millennial Roundtable. We'll see you then.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.